Most people never looked at her. She was just the woman with the mop, invisible in the grand marble lobby of the Elysian Vista Hotel, where businessmen argued over mergers and tourists snapped photos under crystal chandeliers. But on that morning, someone heard her. Not her footsteps, not the sound of her mop sliding across the polished floor. They heard her voice. It started when an elderly Chinese couple, clearly lost, hesitated near the check-in desk. The concierge was busy. No one noticed them, except her. Denise Atwater put down her mop, walked over and spoke Mandarin. Not broken, not hesitant. Fluent, calm, beautifully respectful. The couple's eyes lit up. They smiled, nodded, and began to follow her hand gestures as she explained where to go. Then a child dropped her toy. Her mother, speaking only Spanish, tried to ask for help from a passing staff member, who shrugged and kept walking. Denise turned without pause and switched languages. Spanish, fluent again, soft and clear. A third guest nearby, a French man holding a dripping umbrella, muttered something about poor service. Denise turned, apologised in French, and offered him a towel from the staff closet. 3 languages, 2 minutes, no script, no hesitation. And somewhere across the lobby, Jonathan Kellerman froze. He had been walking, coffee in hand, mid-call with an investor, until the shift in language caught his ear. He looked over and saw her. Not a guest, not an executive, not someone anyone would normally stop to notice. Just a janitor, with $9 shoes, and a voice that danced across continents. Kellerman ended his call without a word, and for the first time in his career, he followed the mop. The next morning, Denise pushed her cleaning cart into the executive wing, a place she usually moved through like a shadow. She was replacing hand soap in the private lounge when she heard the chime. The elevator doors slid open behind her. Jonathan Kellerman stepped out alone. She looked up for only a second, nodded politely, and returned to restocking the supply shelf. But he didn't walk away. "Excuse me," he said. Denise turned, eyebrows slightly raised. He gestured toward the elevator. "You heading down?" She hesitated, then nodded once. They stepped in together. The silence inside felt heavier than it should have. A billionaire CEO in a crisp tailored suit. A janitor in scuffed sneakers and a cart that squeaked. The elevator hummed. Then, without warning, he spoke. "Habari yako?" Swahili. She blinked, then answered, smooth and steady. "Nzuri sana." He nodded, just once, switched again. "Parlez-vous français?" She didn't flinch. "Bien sûr." Another switch. "هل تتحدثين العربية?" Her reply came gently. "Nam, قليلا." The elevator kept descending, but something was rising. A tension, an awareness. Finally, he turned toward her fully. "How many?" he asked. She glanced at him. 9, she said. "Maybe 10, if you count the Latin I whisper at soap dispensers when they break." Kellerman actually laughed. Not politely, genuinely. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. She stepped out with her cart, but before she turned the corner, she paused. Looked over her shoulder. "You don't need a title to know how to speak," she said quietly. Then she was gone. Kellerman remained in the elevator, alone, silent, thinking. Later that afternoon, an unexpected message buzzed on Denise's phone. "Meeting Kellerman, 3 o'clock, office 42F. No details, no explanation. Just an address most janitors never visited." At 2:59, she stood at the edge of a hallway lined with glass and silence. The floor was carpeted so thick it muffled even her cautious footsteps. When she entered, Jonathan Kellerman was staring out the floor-to-ceiling window. Downtown stretched below like a model city, perfect and untouchable. He turned, nodded toward the chair across from his desk. She didn't sit right away. "I'm still on the clock," she said gently. "You'll be paid for this hour," he replied, matching her tone. Only then did she sit. He watched her for a moment, not as a CEO, not as a man with power, but as someone unsure how to ask the right question. "I want to understand," he said. Denise didn't pretend to misunderstand. She leaned back, eyes steady. "I was a linguistics major," she began. "University of Pennsylvania, full scholarship. I was going to specialise in endangered languages." Kellerman nodded, listening. "My mum got sick in my 2nd year. Pancreatic cancer, fast, aggressive. She was a nurse her whole life, but the insurance barely covered anything." Her voice never cracked. She spoke like someone who'd made peace with facts no one should have to carry. "I dropped out, worked double shifts, lost the scholarship, never went back." "What about your father?" She almost smiled. "He left when I was 8. I think he sends Christmas cards to himself." Kellerman didn't interrupt. "I had a daughter, worked night jobs, janitorial work paid steady, and I kept studying." She looked down at her hands. "Used to sneak audio lessons in while cleaning the gym. Read language books during my lunch break, memorized vocabulary while folding laundry. Why? He asked quietly. Because it reminded me I was still me, not just someone who wipes down elevators. Her eyes lifted, calm, certain. I never needed applause. I just didn't want to disappear. Silence filled the room again. But this time it felt less like distance and more like respect. Kellerman sat back in his chair. You ever think about going back? She gave the smallest shrug. I think about finishing what I started, sure. But I've got a kid, a second job on weekends, and enough bills to qualify for a PhD in survival. He nodded slowly. Then he smiled. You're the most overqualified person I've ever underpaid. Denise raised an eyebrow. That's supposed to be a compliment? Depends, he said. Do you want something better? She stood. I've always wanted better. I've just never waited around for someone to offer it. And with that, she turned toward the door. But just before she left, she glanced back over her shoulder. If this was just a conversation to make you feel better, don't call me again. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and Kellerman sat alone, still watching the city, but now wondering how many other voices he'd ignored, simply because they didn't come wearing a suit. The invitation came without warning. Not a formal memo, not even an email. Just a call from Kellerman's assistant. Boardroom East, 10 o'clock. Mr. Kellerman said you'll know why. Denise almost laughed. She was holding a mop when the call came through. She looked down at her gloves, then at her reflection in the polished elevator door. Then she showed up. The room was all glass and chrome. Executives in sleek suits, expensive watches. The scent of imported coffee and expectation. On one end of the table, 5 Brazilian partners. On the other, the Elysian Vista team, Kellerman at the centre. And then Denise, wearing her janitor uniform. She stepped in quietly, but the shift in the room was immediate. Conversations stalled, brows furrowed. One man whispered, "Is this a mistake?" Kellerman stood. "Gentlemen," he said, "our interpreter had an emergency, but I'd like to introduce someone who may be even more helpful." He turned to Denise. "Would you be willing to assist?" She didn't hesitate. She walked to the front of the room, nodded respectfully to the guests, and began. In perfect Portuguese, "Senhores, é uma honra estar aqui. Agradeço pela paciência e pela oportunidade de ajudar. Gentlemen, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for your patience and the opportunity to assist." The Brazilian partners froze. Then one leaned forward, eyes narrowing in surprise. As the meeting progressed, Denise moved like water, effortless, fluid, precise. She translated financial terms without blinking. Softened tense phrases. Clarified cultural nuances that no textbook could have taught. At one point, she even corrected a number on a graph that had been mistranslated, saving the entire deal from veering off course. Kellerman watched it all. But more importantly, so did everyone else. No one interrupted her, no one questioned her, because brilliance makes silence impossible. By the end of the meeting, one of the Brazilian executives approached her privately. "You were incredible," he said in English with a thick accent. "Where did you study?" She smiled. "On the night shift." Outside, as the room emptied, Denise walked past Kellerman. He didn't stop her, just called out softly, "Well done." She turned briefly. "You didn't tell them who I was," she said. "I wanted them to see it before I said it," he replied. She held his gaze for a second longer, then walked away. But this time, the room didn't look at her like she didn't belong. They looked at her like they'd just missed something important, and were trying to catch up. The next morning, a note appeared on Denise's locker shelf, folded neatly, handwritten. 11 o'clock, executive office, just us, JK. She held it in her hands for a while, fingers resting on the paper like it might dissolve. At 10:58, she stood outside the tallest door in the building. Not because she was nervous, because she remembered how many times she'd walked past it, mop in hand, completely unseen. This time she knocked. Kellerman stood by the window again, just like the first time, but his posture was different now. Less CEO, more human. "Come in," he said, and gestured to the seat. She remained standing. He didn't push it. "I want to offer you something," he began, "a role that doesn't exist yet, but should." She tilted her head, curious but calm. "I'm creating a position," he continued. "Cultural liaison for international affairs. You'd work across departments with global clients. You'd mentor junior staff, fix what's broken between people before it becomes business." Denise said nothing. Kellerman exhaled. "I know it's sudden, but yesterday, you didn't just save that meeting. You changed the dynamic. Everyone left wanting to listen better. That's not strategy, that's presence." Still, she didn't respond. Finally, he asked, "Do you want it?" Denise looked out this window. The skyline glittered like possibility, but she wasn't dazzled. "I want to belong," she said softly, "not be paraded." Kellerman stepped closer. "You won't be." She finally moved to sit, and for the first time he noticed she was still wearing her janitor uniform. Not by accident. She smoothed the front of it before she spoke again. "This uniform reminds me of the rooms I was allowed to enter, and the ones I wasn't." He nodded slowly. "You can keep it, frame it if you want, burn it if you need, but you'll never wear it again." A long silence stretched between them. Then Denise stood once more. "I'll do it," she said, "but not because you offered, because I earned it." Kellerman smiled, quietly, gratefully. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. "You know," she said, "the world doesn't change when someone gets power. It changes when they remember what it felt like not to have any." Then she left, and in her absence, the room felt heavier, like it had just witnessed something rare. Not a promotion, a reclamation. By Monday morning, the whispers had already begun. Some came with curiosity, others carried a sharper edge. She was the janitor, right? Is this a publicity stunt? She must have something on Kellerman. Denise heard them all, but she didn't flinch. She walked through the halls not in a designer suit or corporate grey, but a simple navy blouse, dark slacks, and worn-in shoes that had moulded to her feet over the years. No nameplate, no assistant trailing behind, just her. Still Denise, but not quite the same. In her new office, tucked between legal and international affairs, she unpacked a small box. One photo of her daughter, a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Linguist," and a folded janitor's uniform. She didn't hang it in the closet, she framed it, right above her desk. When her assistant walked in and stared at it wide-eyed, Denise just smiled. "Don't worry," she said, "it's not a warning, it's a mirror." The assistant didn't understand, not yet, but she would. Word of her promotion moved faster than the elevators. Some executives were polite, others offered tight smiles. A few avoided her entirely. During one meeting, a senior manager, grey suit, slicked hair, polished charm, leaned across the table and said, "Forgive me, Denise, but what exactly qualifies you for this position?" The room stiffened. Denise didn't look offended. She didn't even blink. She leaned forward just slightly, voice calm as ever. "Let's see," she said. 9 languages. 6 years navigating a company without being seen. 3 major deals rescued in 1 week, and a lifetime of translating tension into trust. She folded her hands. "But if you mean a piece of paper on a wall, no, I don't have that. Just receipts, real ones." Silence followed. Then Kellerman from the head of the table added quietly, "She's the only reason we're still in business with Brazil." That shut the conversation down. Later that day, Denise walked the halls alone, just like she used to. Only now people stepped aside. Some nodded, some looked away. One intern, holding a stack of folders, offered a nervous smile and whispered, "We're rooting for you." Denise stopped. She looked at the young woman, tired eyes, name tag slightly crooked, coffee stain on her sleeve, and saw a version of herself. "You don't have to root," Denise said gently. "Just remember who you are, even when they don't." Then she walked on, and behind her, for the first time, the building began to feel just a little less cold. They called it luck at first. A mistranslation corrected before it became a $1 million mistake. An offended international partner reassured before a deal collapsed. A long silent employee suddenly speaking up in meetings. But it wasn't luck. It was Denise. She didn't make speeches, she didn't demand attention. She just listened, closely, fully, and spoke when it mattered. In one strategy session, she caught a phrase that would have insulted an entire Korean delegation. In another, she noticed the look on a junior associate's face before he could excuse himself. "You have something to say," she told him. He did, and it changed the direction of the meeting. Word travelled differently now, not in emails or press releases, but in glances, in shared nods, in quiet conversations behind elevator doors. "She's sharp," someone whispered. "She makes people feel heard," another said. And one senior partner, who once rolled his eyes at her appointment, now sent documents her way before final review. Not out of protocol, out of trust. One afternoon, a guest from Morocco arrived unexpectedly, part of a visiting delegation. The man stepped into the wrong meeting room, flustered, trying to explain in Arabic. No one understood him, except Denise. She happened to be walking by, coffee in hand. She paused, greeted him warmly, and guided him where he needed to go, all in his native tongue. Later that day, she found a small envelope on her desk. Inside was a handwritten note in Arabic. "You reminded me of home. Thank you." She kept it in her desk drawer, not for pride, for perspective. The following week, Kellerman made a quiet announcement. The company's training room, once a grey, impersonal space filled with outdated posters, would be renamed the Atwater Room. When someone asked why, he simply replied, "Because every voice deserves space to grow." And across the building, something began to shift. Interns who once kept their heads down began to look up. Assistants started offering ideas. People who had been background noise were being heard. All because one woman, long invisible, refused to shrink when the world finally saw her. And instead of filling the room with noise, she filled it with meaning. It happened during a quarterly leadership roundtable, the kind of meeting where polished egos gathered in polished rooms. Denise sat near the end of the table, listening, notebook closed, eyes alert. She didn't speak often at these sessions. When she did, people listened. And that, it seemed, was starting to bother some of them. Midway through a tense discussion about international expansion, an executive, Richard Vaughan, leaned back in his leather chair and smiled tightly. He was old school, Ivy League, the kind of man who measured value in resumes and spoke only in acronyms. "I'm sorry," he said, looking directly at Denise. "I still don't understand how someone with no formal credentials is now reviewing international contracts." The room went silent. Kellerman shifted in his seat, but Denise held up a hand. "I've got this," she said. Then she turned her gaze to Vaughan, calm, steady, unshaken. "You're right," she said. "I don't have a framed degree hanging behind my desk. I've never worn a cap and gown, and I don't know which wine pairs with which business school." A few people chuckled nervously. "But I do know this," she continued. "When our Dubai partner nearly pulled out last month, I was the one who rebuilt trust, because I understood the culture, not just the language." She folded her hands on the table. "When our client from Sao Paulo felt ignored, I called him at midnight, in Portuguese. He stayed. You stayed profitable." Her voice never rose, but her presence filled the room. "I've cleaned the floors you walk on. I've heard things you didn't know you said. And I've watched for years as people with titles forgot what people without them could offer." Vaughan opened his mouth, then closed it. Kellerman, without a word, nodded to continue the meeting. No one else questioned her that day. But later, as the group dispersed, one junior strategist approached her by the elevator. "I've been scared to speak up," he admitted quietly. "But today," Denise smiled. "You don't have to be loud," she said. "You just have to be clear." He nodded. And for the first time, Denise saw something shift. Not in the company, not in policy, but in someone's spine. A little straighter, a little stronger. That, she thought, was enough for today. It appeared one morning without a sound. A yellow sticky note, slightly crooked, pressed gently to the glass of Denise's office door. No signature, no handwriting she recognised, just 5 words written in thick black ink. "We see you, thank you." She stood there, staring at it. The hallway bustled behind her. Executives passing, assistants whispering, phones ringing. But in that moment, everything fell quiet. She didn't take the note down. She opened the door and left it there, where everyone could see it, especially those who still felt unseen. Over the next few weeks, something changed, not in a dramatic, headline-worthy way, but in hundreds of tiny shifts. Interns started knocking on her door, some with questions, others just to talk. Assistants who once kept their heads low now offered suggestions in meetings. Even the cleaning staff began to make eye contact, to smile, to speak. Denise listened to them all, because she knew the cost of being ignored. One evening, long after most lights had dimmed, she stayed behind, finishing notes for a cultural onboarding project. There was a soft knock. A young man stepped in, no older than 22, lanky, nervous, wearing a faded security badge. "Sorry to bother you," he said, voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to say..." He paused, swallowed. "My mum's a housekeeper. She's worked hotel night shifts since I was a kid. She doesn't talk much about it, says no one really cares what she does." He looked up at her, eyes unsure. "But now she asks about you." Denise blinked. "She saw your picture in the break room memo. Said she used to clean the floor outside your old closet. Said you always nodded, even when no one else did." Denise stood slowly, something in her chest tightening. The young man smiled, nervous. "I just wanted to say thanks for not forgetting where you came from." She smiled back. "I couldn't forget it if I tried," she said, then quieter. "And I wouldn't want to." Later that night, as she packed up, she looked once more at the sticky note on her door. "We see you." It wasn't praise, it wasn't a promotion, it was something rarer. It was recognition. And sometimes, that was the very thing people needed to remember who they were capable of becoming. They called it voice. Not a department, not a charity, a program. Built for the ones who were overlooked. The ones whose resumes were thin, but whose experience ran deep. The ones who never fit the mould but kept showing up anyway. Kellerman and Denise launched it 6 months after that note appeared on her door. The idea was simple. Find the hidden talent already working within the walls of the company. Train them, mentor them, invite them to rise. Not because it was generous, but because it was long overdue. At the launch event, they didn't rent a ballroom or invite press. They held it in the newly renamed Atwater room, now flooded with light and framed by photographs of employees in all departments. Housekeeping, kitchen staff, security guards, mailroom runners, people who kept the building alive without ever being seen. The seats were full, not with executives, but with employees who had never been asked what they dreamed of. Denise stood at the front of the room, no podium, no notes, just her voice. "I spent years thinking I didn't belong anywhere," she said, "until I realised I was never supposed to wait for someone else to give me permission to matter." She paused. Some of you already know what it's like to work twice as hard and still be invisible. To carry brilliance quietly because the world expects you to. This, she gestured around the room, is not about handouts, it's about correction. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Behind her, Kellerman stepped forward and said simply, "We've spent years investing in what looks good on paper. It's time we invest in what actually works in the real world, starting with you." After the event, a young man approached Denise. His security badge hung crooked on his chest. His hands trembled as he spoke. "My mom wanted me to thank you again," he said. "She said you made her proud to be a cleaner." Denise smiled. "Tell her," she said softly, "she was never just anything." Later that evening, as the building emptied and the city lit up outside her window, Denise stood alone in her office. The framed janitor uniform still hung on the wall. She walked over to it, placed a hand against the glass and whispered, "Thank you for keeping me grounded." Because she knew this story had never been about her rising. It had always been about making sure no one else stayed invisible. End of story. Sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that spend years in silence. Denise didn't raise her voice to be heard. She simply spoke with truth, and the world finally listened. It reminds me that brilliance doesn't always shine loud. Sometimes it shines quietly, until someone chooses to see it. Thank you for choosing to spend your time here. Among thousands of videos, you picked this one, and that means a lot. If this story moved you, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart. Until next time, take care and see you in the next video.